They laughed at the old motorcycle before they ever looked at the man riding it, and by the time they learned the truth, it was already too late to take back a single word. The little white church on the edge of Millbrook had never looked more beautiful. Fresh white roses lined the entrance, soft music floated through the warm spring air, and expensive cars filled every parking space around the building. Guests stepped out wearing designer suits, elegant dresses, sparkling jewelry, and confident smiles. Every conversation sounded the same. Everyone expected Naomi Brooks to marry someone successful, someone wealthy, someone worthy of the Brooks family name. Naomi stood quietly inside the bridal room, taking a slow breath as she adjusted the simple pearl earrings her late mother had once worn. She looked stunning, but her smile carried a quiet nervousness. She wasn't worried about becoming a wife. She was worried about how people would react when Marcus arrived. She had asked him only one thing. "Please don't be late." Marcus had smiled and promised he wouldn't be. Outside, Naomi's cousin Vanessa Grant laughed with a circle of guests while showing pictures from her luxury vacation on her phone. "I still can't believe Naomi refused Charles," she said with a dramatic sigh. "He owns half the shopping centers in this county, and she picked a guy nobody even knows." The women around her chuckled politely. "Maybe he's secretly rich," one joked. Vanessa rolled her eyes. "If he were rich, someone around here would know his name." Laughter spread through the group again. Just then, the distant rumble of an old motorcycle echoed down the quiet street. Heads slowly turned toward the church entrance. The sound grew louder until an aging black motorcycle rolled through the front gate, its paint faded from years beneath the sun. The engine coughed once before stopping near the front steps. The rider removed his worn helmet. Marcus Coleman climbed off calmly, wearing a clean but modest navy suit that looked carefully pressed despite its age. His shoes had clearly been polished many times over, and his smile remained warm, as though he hadn't noticed the silence surrounding him. Then came the first laugh. Another followed. Within seconds, dozens of guests were whispering behind raised hands. "That's the groom," someone muttered. "He rode that thing to his own wedding?" Another whispered. Vanessa burst into loud laughter. Naomi waited all these years for a man who couldn't even borrow a decent car. Several guests pulled out their phones, recording the embarrassing scene as amused smiles spread across the crowd. Marcus simply thanked an elderly parking attendant who admired the old motorcycle before walking toward the church doors without lowering his head. Hidden among the guests stood an older gentleman in an expensive charcoal suit. The moment he saw Marcus, the color drained from his face. He removed his sunglasses, stared for several long seconds, and whispered almost to himself, "It can't be. Mr. Coleman." The whispers followed Marcus all the way to the church entrance, but he never looked over his shoulder. He simply opened the wooden door and stepped inside with the same quiet confidence that had first caught Naomi's attention months earlier. The soft music stopped almost immediately as curious faces turned toward him. Even the pastor paused for a brief moment before recovering with a welcoming smile. Naomi looked up from the front of the sanctuary, and the moment their eyes met, the worry on her face disappeared. She smiled with complete relief. Marcus smiled back, calm and steady, as though the laughter outside had never happened. Vanessa folded her arms and leaned toward another guest. "Look at him. He actually believes he belongs here." A few people laughed again. Someone quietly wondered whether Marcus could even afford the wedding ring. Another guest whispered that Naomi would probably spend the rest of her life riding on the back of that old motorcycle. None of them noticed the older gentleman standing near the last row. His eyes never left Marcus. His breathing had become noticeably slower, and he carefully adjusted his tie as if preparing himself for something unexpected. Pastor Elijah Brooks stepped forward, forcing a polite smile. Although he loved his daughter deeply, he could not hide the disappointment in his eyes. This was not the wedding he had imagined for her. He had prayed that Naomi would marry a man who could provide security, comfort, and stability. Looking at Marcus's modest suit and remembering the aging motorcycle parked outside, fear quietly settled into his heart. Marcus approached him with respect and extended his hand. "Good morning, sir. Thank you for welcoming me today." Pastor Brooks accepted the handshake, surprised by the firmness of Marcus's grip and the confidence in his voice. "I hope you understand the responsibility of today," he replied gently. Marcus nodded without hesitation. "I understand better than anyone." Before Pastor Brooks could respond, Marcus's phone vibrated once inside his jacket pocket. He glanced at the screen for less than a second before pressing decline. The name displayed across the screen was hidden from everyone else, but his expression never changed. Naomi noticed the brief movement. "Everything is all right?" she asked softly when Marcus reached her side. "Everything is exactly as it should be," he answered with a reassuring smile. She believed him immediately. She had always believed him. That quiet trust only seemed to irritate Vanessa even more. "Naomi," she called loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "There is still time to change your mind, before this becomes the biggest mistake of your life." A few uncomfortable smiles appeared around the room. Naomi slowly turned toward her cousin. "The only mistake I could make today would be letting other people decide who deserves my love." Silence settled over the sanctuary. Marcus looked at Naomi with quiet admiration, while the older gentleman near the back discreetly reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and sent a single text message. Less than 30 seconds later, several black sport utility vehicles turned onto the church road and began moving steadily toward the entrance. The quiet vibration of several approaching engines reached the church before anyone saw the vehicles. Most guests assumed another wealthy family had arrived late, and the ceremony would simply be delayed for a few more minutes. No one connected the growing convoy outside with the man standing calmly beside Naomi. Marcus gently squeezed her hand. His expression remained peaceful, almost reassuring, as though he already knew exactly what was about to happen. Naomi looked into his eyes and smiled softly. She had never cared about expensive cars or impressive titles. During the year they had spent together, Marcus had never promised her a mansion or a luxury vacation. Instead, he remembered every birthday, helped elderly neighbors without expecting praise, volunteered on weekends, and always treated every person with quiet respect. More than once, Naomi had asked why he insisted on riding the same old motorcycle everywhere. Marcus would simply smile and say, "If someone measures my worth by what I drive, then they were never trying to know me." She had laughed and accepted the answer because she loved the man, not the mystery. Across the sanctuary, Vanessa continued whispering to nearby guests. "Just wait until this wedding is over. Reality will catch up with her." Several people nodded in agreement. They believed Marcus represented a future filled with financial struggle, while Naomi had given up every opportunity for a more comfortable life. Pastor Brooks slowly opened his Bible, preparing to begin the ceremony despite the tension filling the room. Before he could speak the first words, a church volunteer hurried toward him from the entrance, with a confused expression. "Pastor," he whispered, "there are at least a dozen black sport utility vehicles outside, and more are arriving every few seconds." Pastor Brooks frowned politely. "Perhaps they are attending another event nearby." The young volunteer shook his head. "No, sir. They stopped here." The older gentleman standing near the back quietly slipped his phone into his pocket after receiving a short reply. His eyes returned to Marcus with unmistakable respect. He did not approach him. He simply waited. Outside, the convoy came to a complete stop. Drivers remained inside their vehicles. No doors opened. No one rushed toward the church. It was as if every person had been instructed to wait for a precise moment. Inside, Marcus remained completely focused on Naomi. "Are you nervous?" she asked with a gentle smile. He looked at her for a brief second, before answering honestly. "Only because today is the most important day of my life." Naomi laughed softly. Mine too. The warmth between them seemed untouched by the whispers surrounding them. Yet beyond the stained glass windows, the line of black vehicles continued to grow longer. Several guests quietly stepped outside to see what was happening. Seconds later, one of them rushed back inside with wide eyes, unable to hide the disbelief on his face, as every conversation inside the church came to an abrupt stop. The uneasy silence inside the church quickly gave way to restless curiosity. One by one, guests drifted toward the windows, trying to catch a better view of the growing line of black sport utility vehicles, parked neatly along the narrow road. Nobody understood why they had arrived, but everyone agreed that something unusual was happening. Vanessa smiled confidently, refusing to be impressed. "It is probably another wedding," she said loudly. "People like Marcus do not attract people like that." A few guests laughed in agreement and returned to their seats, although many continued stealing nervous glances toward the entrance. Pastor Brooks cleared his throat once again. "Family and friends, let us begin." Just as he prepared to continue, the large wooden doors opened quietly. A man dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit stepped inside. His polished shoes echoed softly across the floor as every head turned toward him. He did not speak. Instead, he respectfully looked around the sanctuary before his eyes settled on Marcus. For a brief moment, the room became completely still. The man lowered his head slightly, almost as if acknowledging someone of great importance. Then he stepped aside without saying a single word. More whispers spread through the church. "Who is that?" someone quietly asked. "Maybe he is from a bank," another guessed. Marcus remained exactly where he was, showing no surprise at all. Naomi noticed the exchange, but chose not to ask questions. She trusted Marcus completely, even if she did not understand what was unfolding around them. Vanessa, however, interpreted the silence differently. She walked several steps forward with a confident smile. "Excuse me," she called toward the suited man. "If you are looking for someone important, I think you may have the wrong church." The man politely smiled, but did not answer her. Instead, he kept his attention fixed on Marcus. That single detail made several guests exchange confused looks. Outside, another luxury vehicle slowly entered the parking area, followed by two more. The convoy now stretched far beyond the church entrance. Several drivers stepped out at the same time, each dressed with quiet professionalism. Yet none of them entered the building. They simply waited. Inside, Pastor Brooks could no longer hide his concern. He looked toward Marcus. "Son, do you know what is happening?" Marcus answered with complete calm. "Yes, sir. But I was hoping the ceremony could begin before anyone interrupted your daughter's special day." His answer only deepened the mystery. How could a man who arrived on an aging motorcycle speak with such confidence while surrounded by something that clearly left everyone else confused? The older gentleman standing near the back smiled for the first time. He quietly whispered, "That has always been the kind of man he is." Before anyone could ask what he meant, another phone vibrated near the church entrance. The suited man glanced at the message, nodded respectfully, and looked directly at Marcus before saying in a calm voice that carried through the silent sanctuary, "Sir, they have all arrived, and they are waiting for your instructions." The simple words echoed through the sanctuary with astonishing weight. "Sir, they have all arrived, and they are waiting for your instructions." For several long seconds, nobody moved. The guests looked from the suited man to Marcus, then back again, trying to understand whether they had heard correctly. Vanessa let out a nervous laugh. "There must be some mistake," she said quickly. "He cannot possibly be talking to him." The suited man did not react. His attention remained respectfully fixed on Marcus. Pastor Brooks lowered his Bible slightly, unable to hide the confusion on his face. Even Naomi looked at Marcus with quiet curiosity, although there was no fear in her eyes. She simply wanted to understand the part of his life he had never spoken about. Marcus smiled gently at the man and answered in a calm voice. "Thank you for coming. Please ask everyone to remain outside for just a few more minutes. Today belongs to Naomi." The man nodded immediately. "Yes, sir." Without another word, he turned and walked back toward the entrance. Every pair of eyes followed him until the church doors closed once again. The silence that remained felt almost unreal. A guest whispered, "Who gives orders like that?" Another quietly replied, "Whoever he is, those people clearly work for him." Outside the stained glass windows, several men in dark suits could now be seen standing beside the parked vehicles. They were not talking loudly or drawing attention to themselves. Instead, they waited with remarkable patience, almost as though delaying their own schedules for one person's request was perfectly normal. Inside, Vanessa refused to accept what everyone else was beginning to suspect. She stepped closer to Marcus with a forced smile. "This is some kind of joke, is not it? Maybe you hired actors for your wedding entrance." A few uncertain laughs followed, but they sounded weak this time. Marcus simply looked at her kindly. "No one is acting today." His answer was so calm that it unsettled her even more. Naomi gently reached for his hand again. "You never told me any of this," she whispered. Marcus looked at her with complete sincerity. "I promised myself that if I ever married, it would be because a woman loved my character before she ever learned anything else about me." Naomi smiled through the growing mystery. "Then I suppose I made the right decision." Her quiet answer reached Pastor Brooks, who suddenly remembered every conversation he had shared with Marcus over the past year. The young man had always spoken with unusual wisdom, unusual confidence, and unusual humility. At the time, he had assumed those qualities came from strong character alone. Now he began to wonder if there had always been something far greater hidden beneath the surface. Before anyone could ask another question, the church doors opened once more, and this time 3 distinguished men entered together, each carrying a small leather portfolio. The moment they saw Marcus, all 3 stopped, lowered their heads respectfully, and waited for permission to take another step. The 3 distinguished men remained perfectly still until Marcus gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Only then did they step forward together. The oldest among them opened his leather portfolio and spoke with unmistakable respect. "Good morning, Mr. Coleman. We sincerely apologize for the interruption, but several documents require your signature before noon. The board insisted that we bring them personally after learning that today was your wedding day." A wave of disbelief swept across the church. Someone quietly whispered, "Did he just call him Mr. Coleman?" Another guest leaned closer, trying to hear every word. The second man carefully placed a folder on a nearby table. Embossed across the cover in gold letters was the name Coleman Global Holdings. Pastor Brooks stared at the folder, and recognition slowly spread across his face. He had seen that company featured in national business magazines countless times. It owned commercial properties, manufacturing plants, technology firms, and charitable foundations across the country. The company had been valued in the billions of dollars only a few months earlier. His eyes slowly lifted toward Marcus. "That cannot be the same Coleman," he murmured under his breath. The oldest executive smiled politely. "There is only one founder of Coleman Global Holdings, sir." Every person inside the sanctuary turned toward Marcus at exactly the same moment. Vanessa felt her confidence disappear. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That is impossible." The older gentleman who had quietly observed everything finally stepped forward. "It is not impossible," he said calmly. "I have worked beside Mr. Coleman for nearly 20 years. He built his company from nothing and became the wealthiest businessman in this county, without ever forgetting how ordinary people deserve to be treated." Complete silence filled the church. Marcus looked almost embarrassed by the attention. "Today is not about my business," he said gently. "Please, let us finish the wedding." But before anyone could respond, another executive entered, carrying a small velvet case. He approached Marcus respectfully. "Sir, your grandfather asked that this family heirloom be presented before your vows." Marcus accepted the case without opening it. Naomi looked at him with surprise, not because of his wealth, but because she suddenly realized how much he had sacrificed to keep his identity hidden. He had chosen to let people underestimate him rather than risk being loved only for his fortune. Tears quietly filled Pastor Brooks's eyes as he remembered every doubt he had carried that morning. Vanessa lowered her head, unable to meet Naomi's eyes anymore. The same guests who had laughed outside now stood frozen in stunned silence, while beyond the church windows, dozens of executives, advisors, and security professionals continued waiting patiently for one man who had arrived on an old motorcycle, because the only opinion that truly mattered to him was the woman standing beside him at the altar. No one inside the church could remember the last time silence had felt so heavy. The laughter that had filled the room only minutes earlier had completely disappeared, replaced by expressions of disbelief and quiet embarrassment. Guests who had proudly mocked Marcus now avoided looking in his direction. Some stared at the floor. Others pretended to study the stained glass windows. Vanessa stood frozen where she was, her confident smile gone. Every cruel joke she had made echoed painfully in her own memory. She slowly walked toward Marcus, forcing an awkward smile that no longer looked convincing. "Marcus," she began softly, "I suppose we may have gotten off on the wrong foot." Marcus looked at her with the same calm expression he had worn all morning. There was no anger in his eyes. There was no satisfaction either. "Perhaps," he answered politely. Vanessa laughed nervously. "I hope you know nobody meant any real harm." Several guests immediately nodded, eager to distance themselves from their own earlier behavior. One man even stepped forward and said, "We were only teasing because we did not know who you were." Marcus smiled gently before asking a simple question. "Would your words have been different if I had remained an ordinary man?" Nobody answered. The silence itself became the answer. Pastor Brooks slowly approached Marcus with visible emotion. "Son," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I believed I was judging your ability to care for my daughter, but I realize now that I was judging your appearance instead." Marcus respectfully shook his head. "You were protecting someone you love. Any father would do the same." Those words only deepened the pastor's regret. Naomi watched the exchange with tears forming in her eyes. The man she loved had every opportunity to embarrass those who had humiliated him, yet he chose kindness instead. That was the man she had fallen in love with long before anyone knew his name, carried extraordinary influence. Around the sanctuary, conversations slowly changed. The same guests who had whispered insults were now speaking with admiration. They remembered how Marcus had greeted every employee with respect, thanked the parking attendant, and remained humble even after his identity had been revealed. The older gentleman smiled quietly as he observed the room. "That is exactly why he succeeded," he said. "His fortune was never the greatest thing about him." Vanessa lowered her head. For the first time that day, she walked over to Naomi instead of Marcus. I was wrong, she admitted, with genuine embarrassment. I spent so much time measuring people by what they owned that I forgot to look at who they were. Naomi gently squeezed her cousin's hand. It is never too late to learn that lesson. Marcus then turned toward the waiting executives near the entrance. Please thank everyone outside for their patience, he said. After the ceremony, I will greet each of them personally. Right now, I only want to become Naomi's husband. As the executives nodded respectfully and stepped back once more, every guest in the church finally understood that the richest man in the county had not come there to prove his wealth. He had come to prove something far more valuable. And in that quiet church, every heart had already begun to change. Pastor Brooks smiled warmly as he looked at the bride and groom. I believe we have delayed this beautiful moment long enough, he said gently. Soft laughter spread through the church, this time filled with relief instead of mockery. The ceremony finally began. Marcus and Naomi stood facing one another, their hands joined, while sunlight poured through the stained glass windows and covered them in warm colors. None of the luxury vehicles outside mattered anymore. None of the whispered opinions mattered either. At that moment, there were only two people making a promise that would last far beyond a single day. When it came time to exchange vows, Marcus looked into Naomi's eyes with quiet emotion. You loved me before you knew anything about my success, he said. You believed in my heart before anyone believed in my name. I cannot promise that every day will be easy, but I promise that every decision I make will honor you, protect you, and remind you that you were always the greatest blessing in my life. Tears slowly rolled down Naomi's cheeks as she smiled. I never fell in love with your future, she replied softly. I fell in love with the man who showed kindness when nobody was watching, who respected people without expecting anything in return, and who never tried to impress me with money. If I had known who you really were, I would still have chosen the same man standing before me today. There was not a dry eye anywhere in the sanctuary. Even Vanessa quietly wiped away tears as she realized how differently the day could have ended if Naomi had listened to everyone else's opinions. After the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, joyful applause filled the church. Marcus then surprised everyone by asking if he could speak for just a moment before the celebration continued. He stepped toward the front with Naomi beside him. Many people believe today became unforgettable because my identity was revealed, he began calmly. I believe today became unforgettable because one woman refused to measure a person by appearances. He turned toward Naomi with a grateful smile before continuing. To celebrate our marriage, Naomi and I would like to begin our life together by giving something back. The guests listened in complete silence. Our family foundation will establish a scholarship program for students in this county who dream of attending college but cannot afford tuition. We will also fully restore this church, create a community food pantry, and fund repairs for the local youth center. Gasps of amazement spread throughout the sanctuary. Pastor Brooks covered his face with both hands, overwhelmed by emotion. The older church members quietly thanked God, while younger families embraced one another with joyful smiles. Marcus had not used his wealth to make anyone feel small. Instead, he had turned one wedding into a blessing for an entire community. Looking around the room, Naomi realized that the greatest gift Marcus had given everyone was not money at all. It was the reminder that true character can remain hidden beneath the simplest appearance, and that kindness will always reveal a person's real worth long before wealth ever can. As the celebration continued, guests slowly stepped outside into the warm afternoon sunshine, where the line of black sport utility vehicles still waited quietly along the road. Business leaders, community partners, and longtime employees greeted Marcus with genuine respect, but he introduced every one of them to Naomi before speaking about anything else. "This is my wife," he said proudly each time, and those simple words seemed to mean more to him than every business title he had ever earned. Pastor Brooks watched with grateful eyes, realizing that true greatness had never changed Marcus's humble spirit. The reception that followed felt unlike any wedding the town had ever seen. There was laughter, music, and joyful conversation, but the most meaningful moments happened in the smallest conversations. The elderly parking attendant who had admired the old motorcycle earlier found Marcus thanking him once again for taking such good care of it. The church volunteers who had spent hours decorating the sanctuary each received handwritten notes of appreciation from the newly married couple. Even the children who attended the wedding were surprised with books, bicycles, and scholarships for future educational programs funded through the new foundation. Vanessa quietly approached Naomi one final time. "You trusted your heart while the rest of us trusted appearances," she admitted. "I hope one day I become the kind of person who sees people the way you do." Naomi embraced her gently. "Every new beginning starts with one honest lesson," she replied. As the afternoon came to an end, several executives respectfully opened the doors of an elegant luxury sedan waiting nearby. Marcus smiled appreciatively before shaking his head. "Thank you, but not today." The executives immediately understood and stepped back without question. Marcus walked across the parking lot toward the same old motorcycle that had caused so much laughter only hours before. He carefully placed Naomi's bouquet into a small storage compartment, helped her onto the seat behind him, and adjusted her helmet with the same quiet care he had shown throughout the entire day. Guests watched in complete silence. No one laughed this time. Instead, many smiled with admiration. Behind the motorcycle, the long convoy of luxury vehicles slowly started their engines. They did not move ahead of Marcus. They followed at a respectful distance, allowing the newly married couple to lead the way. The image remained unforgettable. The simplest vehicle traveled first, while extraordinary wealth quietly followed behind it. Pastor Brooks stood beside the church steps and whispered, "That is exactly how it should be." As the motorcycle disappeared beyond the tree-lined road, Naomi wrapped her arms around Marcus and rested her head gently against his shoulder. She had married the richest man in town, but that was never the reason she loved him. She loved the man who chose humility over pride, character over reputation, and genuine love over admiration. Long after the convoy vanished from sight, people in Millbrook continued telling the story of that remarkable wedding. Yet the lesson they remembered most was not about hidden wealth. It was about the danger of judging a life by its appearance and the lasting truth that the greatest treasures are often carried by the humblest hearts.